Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at a discovery by security forces following a prevented terror attack in Jammu and the concerns it raises. But first, we're looking at Tamil cinema's biggest star contemplating a formal entry into politics and whether he may have missed the bus. On Monday, Rajnikant stood outside his Chennai house where fans and media had assembled. He was going to talk about a potential entry into politics. But finally, it was a damn squib.
சொன்னாங்க நானும் என்னுடைய பார்வை அவர்கிட்ட வந்து பறந்துக்கிட்டேன் ஸோ
The actor said that the district secretaries of his fan club had expressed their opinions and he had shared his views. He said that the heads of the fan clubs had promised to stand by whatever decision he took. I will make a decision as soon as possible, he said, and walked back into his house. That announcement by the actor was as vague as it gets, with little clarity on whether he would actually be contesting the Tamil Nadu elections in 2021. Arun Janardhanan, who covers the state of Tamil Nadu for the Indian Express, says Rajnikant's entry into politics has been long awaited but also long delayed. We're now speaking with Arun about the star's announcement, whether he can be a force in the elections, and whether the actor who's known for his dramatic entries in films may have timed this one wrong. Arun, could you start by telling us when Rajnikant showed an interest in politics and what he's done since then?
As we know, he was a bus conductor in his early life who worked in Karnataka, and he entered politics at the age of 25. His first political encounter was with the former Chief Minister, late Jayalalitha. He had a lot of personal troubles during Jayalalitha's first regime in 91-96. And her defeat in 96 was actually, that was the campaign. In 1996 assembly poll campaigns, Rajnikant made statements against Jayalalitha. He in fact said that, but nobody can save Tamil Nadu if Jayalalitha is elected again. So that was his first political statement. And that was the moment that first triggered the speculations that, Rajnikant will enter politics.
And more recently, he's again shown that interest in sort of entering politics that came soon after Kamal Hassan. But, what has he been up to since then and what has he done to enter active politics?
No, in fact, after 96, there were speculations, and for each and every big release of Rajini movies, there will be a speculation that, he will be launching a party, he will be entering politics. And he has, of course, one of the most powerful fan clubs in India, well organized and network, who are doing a lot of charity and other social work. So people have been waiting, and the rumors and speculations have been there for more than 2 decades, since 96. And finally, in December 2017, that was when he made the first decisive statement. He announced that his party will face elections in the next assembly polls. Later in March 2020, he made another statement with a clarity in which he said that he will not contest as a CM candidate. He said that he will never contest elections to become chief minister. And this was again, asserted that he will be launching his party and he will be contesting. His party will be there in the fray for May 2021 assembly polls.
So on Monday, arguably Tamil cinema's biggest superstar said that he'd decide his entry into politics at a later date. Given the elections now just barely months away, wouldn't that be too late? Or can he actually make such a late entry and still aim to make a big impact?
Of course, this is too late for Rajnikant to start campaigns, since he was nowhere in the political campaigns or political work. But at the same time, Rajnikant's party announcement, it was no more a rumor or speculation. It was supposed to happen in December 2020. But due to the pandemic, there are some new challenges arise, because he had a kidney transplant in 2016. So in yesterday's meeting also, he told his fans about, the kind of risk factors that he faced. Because if he is launching the party, then he will have to travel across the state and campaign. He has to address public rallies. So all these are going to be a challenging thing because the vaccine and such remedies are yet to come, and this is definitely a real threat for his health. So from September onwards, there were active discussions in Rajinikanth camp about possible ways to handle this situation. There were discussions about whether they can do it digitally, whether he can do campaigns digitally, whether he can address public rallies digitally. But all these options, all these possibilities have been ruled out because when all rival leaders, let it be DMK Chief Stalin, who is the opposition leader, or the Chief Minister Edappadi K. Palaniswamy, so all top leaders, including Kamal Hassan, all these top leaders and other regional party leaders, they're all traveling across the state. They're all doing party work on the ground. So in such a scenario, Rajinikanth cannot, manage his campaign digitally alone. That will not, bring him a real benefit out of this election. So these are the challenges arise, but even people in his close circle are not sure about his final decision because Rajinikanth was always a very shy, unassuming man who may be blamed for not taking a decision or for being indecisive or whatever. But Rajinikanth has been always like that. Rajinikanth was always confused, and he was a man who used to take a lot of time to think on his own. So at this stage, also yesterday, he told his fans, he listened to them and he told them that I will take a decision on my own, and they promised, of course, as a courtesy, that they will stand with whatever decision he take. So Rajinikanth's decision is going to be Rajinikanth's decision, even if there can be a lot of arguments about what all factors that can influence Rajinikanth. But there are two versions coming right now. One is that he is unlikely to launch party. A section of people in his camp are saying that there are serious concerns about his health, so he's unlikely to launch a party. Also, there are new reports coming that they are taking some extraordinary steps to safeguard his health while launching a campaign.
You also mentioned how he has this very developed fan club and this fan base that is not just even in Tamil Nadu, that extends across India in a sense. Does that effectively then make him a political factor even if he's not contesting the elections?
Maybe Rajinikanth's major challenge is going to be about proving his strength, because there are many people who say that Rajinikanth is already delayed. It's already a delayed decision to enter politics. He should have done it 10 years back or 20 years back. But the challenge before him is that the kind of response that Captain Vijayakanth received in 2006. Captain Vijayakanth is nowhere near Rajinikanth in terms of the kind of public popularity or the fan base. But of course, Vijayakanth was also a hero of villages, hero of rural Tamil Nadu at the same time. But my point is that when Rajinikanth launched a party, there are 2-3 factors. One is that Rajinikanth cannot be a alliance member with DMK or ADMK because his fans will be working for his party when he is the chief minister candidate. That is the main catch of the entire election game. So he has to be the chief minister candidate according to his fans. So in that case, he cannot be a junior member in DMK or ADMK alliance. At the same time, he has to score a decent vote share in the election. When Vijayakanth contested in 2006, after launching his new party, he got more than 8% vote share in the state, in the assembly polls. Vijayakanth was the single candidate who contested and won the election, but he had candidates in all the seats in Tamil Nadu. So that is how he got more than 8% vote share in the state.
Vijayakanth, the actor that Arun mentioned, first made a splash in Tamil Nadu politics over a decade ago. In 2006, Vijayakanth won just one seat and was the only member of his party, called DMDK, elected to the assembly. However, in the 2011 assembly polls that were swept by Jayalalitha's AIADMK, Vijayakanth's party won 29 seats. That was more seats than even the DMK, which won just 23 seats. However, in the 2016 assembly elections, the party and Vijayakanth were wiped out, not winning even a single seat.
So this is what going to be the challenge of Rajinikanth also. If Rajinikanth has to prove his strength, Rajinikanth has to score more than 10% vote, then he has to contest in all seats, even if his candidates are not going to make it. But of course, Rajinikanth, if he is contesting, if he is launching the party, it used to be reported that, he Thousand Lights, where the constituency where he lived, there he would be contesting. But at the same time, he will be definitely winning the election. It's all about the percentage of vote share that his party will get. And even if he has a larger fan base, all these fans are not supposed to come and join his party, because these fans are part of many political parties, many religions. So his fan base is not going to fully translate into votes. So there are multiple challenges before Rajinikanth, beside all this COVID factor and the challenges in organizing public rallies.
So it also raises the question about Rajinikanth and Kamal Haasan, two of Tamil cinema's biggest actors, who have both now kind of started to dabble with politics and yet seem to be struggling. And it's kind of odd because this is a state that has been governed by people from the film industry like MGR, Jayalalitha and Karunanidhi. And why is it that these two actors suddenly find it so much harder?
If you look at the way these two actors have entered politics, the way they triggered debates about their entry into politics much before they themselves announced it, we can see that these decisions, the decisions to enter politics, were not only about social work, not only about entering into the electoral politics, but for them, for Rajinikanth and Kamal Haasan, entering politics was also about keeping their relevance alive. They have to, remain relevant, not only in the market, but also in their public life. They want to ensure their presence everywhere. But at the same time, we can see that they are all half-hearted. They were really not, dedicating their time fully for the political work or building the party. Both Kamal and Rajini, we can see that in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, they were more into their profession. They were more into their money-making profession that sustained them in the last 3, 4, 5 decades. And entering politics may be also about, safeguarding themselves from many forces and protect the kind of assets they made.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say that they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there's perhaps no other place that does this better than the Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of the newspaper, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log into indianexpress.com/explained and access their coverage 24/7. Explained by the Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. When security forces killed 4 suspected Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists on the 19th of November ahead of local polls in Jammu and Kashmir, they recovered a massive haul of arms and ammunition. But they also discovered something that revealed how the terrorists, who are believed to have come from Pakistan, crossed the border. Deeptiman Tiwari, who covers security agencies for the Indian Express, joins us now to explain what they discovered. In this case, where the terrorists were killed in Jammu ahead of the local polls, what was it that struck security agencies?
First, the massive amount of arms and ammunition which was recovered from the 4 slain Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists. There were 11 AK-47 rifles on 4 people, 47 magazines, 3 pistols, lots of ammunition, 7.5 kg RDX, IED wires, which simply meant that these guys were coming in, going to Kashmir, and these weapons would be distributed among other people. And because there was significant amount of explosives that they were carrying, obviously the plan was to launch a big attack, which would be coordinated after they reach Kashmir Valley and would get some instructions from Pakistan. Because it was scheduled very close to the DDC polls, the speculation was that probably they were trying to target DDC polls or destabilize security situation before the DDC polls. Also, what was important was the electronic gadgets that were recovered from them. The GPS, which was recovered from them when decoded, gave the exact route which they used to enter India. And one of the pinpointed locations on the GPS where it showed that they had assembled after, crossing the border, that when, located on the ground was in Samba sector. It was near the mouth of a tunnel. And that's how 2 days after the attack, a 200-meter tunnel, which was pretty well made and quite sophisticated as compared to some of the other tunnels that we've seen in the past, and that was discovered.
Diptiman says that the tunnel was reinforced with sandbags and was large enough for someone to walk through if they crouched.
When you're carrying load and when you have significant distance to cover, such as in a tunnel, 200 meters is a significant distance because, there is less of oxygen and ventilation is not there. So you will be struggling for breath. So if you can walk and quickly cross the tunnel, it is better. And this was also dug 25 feet under the ground. That makes detection of a tunnel very, very difficult because, the soil will not cave in because it's very deep. Even if it rains or anything happens like that, it will also not be detected by some gadgets. So it has to be physically and manually detected. Only then you will do.
Deeptiman says that the use of tunnels in Jammu and Kashmir is specific to certain terror groups. It's defined by where these terror groups operate and where they infiltrate into India.
There are three main terror groups which are operational in Kashmir, and they are Hizbul Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Now, Hizbul Mujahideen is local. They are local boys. Of course, it gets support from Pakistan, but their operatives, their gunmen, they do not come from Pakistan. They are local Kashmiri lads. LET and Jaish-e-Mohammed, they come from Pakistan. Now, LET has its operational base in Muzaffarabad, and their launch pads are also on the Muzaffarabad border. So they largely take the line of control route to come to Kashmir. So you will largely find that, encounters with LET happening in Kupwara, which is near the LOC, or in North Kashmir, largely those encounters will happen. Jaish-e-Mohammed, which has its headquarters in Bahawalpur and has its launch pads on the Shakargarh and Sialkot belt in Pakistan near the border, because they're closer to Jammu. So they largely take the Jammu route. If we look at past 6 to 7 years, all terror attacks carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed in Kashmir, when they were investigated, the attackers were found to have used the Jammu border to infiltrate into Jammu and Kashmir. They then come into Jammu and they have couriers who take them in vehicles and transport them to Kashmir.
Diptiman says that when it comes to the line of control, it's not fully fenced, but the terrain is more arduous and requires terrorists to be fitter and better trained. And they have to get past Indian forces as well. Along the Jammu border, the Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists have to deal with a fully fenced border and with a lot of security infrastructure in place.
Earlier, the Jammu border was not fully fenced, so it was easy to walk across if you could hoodwink the patrolling. But now there is more manpower, more security infrastructure, more surveillance. So they either take these riverines. There are lots of small creeks which cross the border between India and Pakistan on the Jammu international border. So they either use the creeks, or when they find that difficult, they dig tunnels. And these tunnels are used both for purposes of smuggling and for infiltrating terrorists.
Diptiman says that the history of tunnels across the border to Pakistan is something that has been documented since the 1990s. But it wasn't first documented in Kashmir.
In fact, it started way back in 1997. And that was in the aftermath of the Khalistan movement. And at that time, tunnels were only found on Punjab border. That was because due to the Khalistan movement and what happened in Punjab in 1980s, the entire Punjab border was fenced. Once it was fenced and there were floodlights and everything, it was difficult to cross the border on the ground. So they started tunneling. Those days, tunnels used to be very unsophisticated and small tunnels with low height. So terrorists or smugglers would largely crawl through those tunnels. Between 2003, when the last tunnel was found in Punjab, and 2012, no tunnels were found on Indo-Pak border anywhere. So one could safely assume that probably tunnels were not being dug. That was largely because militancy in Punjab had ebbed away and it had shifted to Kashmir, but Jammu border was not fully fenced and it did not have the kind of security infrastructure that we have today. Now, once Jammu border was fenced and a lot of manpower was put in on the international border, there were floodlights. Now we have thermal imaging cameras and we have surveillance cameras, and there are laser walls, basically laser beams over certain riverine areas which cannot be fenced. So if you cross them, it sets off an alarm. So all kinds of security infrastructure is there, which makes crossing the border terrestrially very, very difficult. That is why we see a lot of tunneling happening.
As Diptiman pointed out earlier, the latest tunnel discovered by Indian security forces was reinforced and big enough for a person to walk through instead of crawling. What does that tell us?
For that, if we go back to 2012, when the most sophisticated tunnel till date was discovered again in Jammu. Now, this tunnel was 255 meters long between India and Pakistan. Its height was 5 feet, which means you could just walk. And it was reinforced with wooden planks on 3 sides, that is left, right, and above, so that it would not cave in and, there won't be any dust inside. And then, there were overhead pipes which led to the ground overhead, basically to keep the tunnel ventilated so that air could flow in, so that when they were walking across, there would be no dearth of oxygen. Now, this kind of tunneling cannot be done by smugglers because this has telltale signs of military engineering services. So, those planks were also like properly cut, evenly sized, nicely done, which meant that it had been done in a factory. And all the things that were set up there were so sophisticated that it could not have been done by smugglers. So it clearly indicated that the Pakistan Rangers or Pakistan Army had used its resources to build that tunnel so that it could facilitate infiltration of terrorists. Generally, when smugglers dig tunnels, they're like 50 feet, 2.5 feet wide, or 2 feet with height where you have to crawl. And it's generally a very small and foxhole kind of a thing which you can quickly enter and quickly get out to take your small, load that you have, maybe 5 kg of heroin or whatever. So that sort of a thing. So this simply meant that the Pakistani state was involved.
If such advanced tunnels are built along the Indian border, what is the complication for Indian security forces? Does this change anything about how they handle the security along the border? And is this a sort of additional worry for them then?
It is a worry. Tunneling is a worry because it's very difficult to detect tunnels. Okay, there is no foolproof technology available anywhere in the world which can detect tunnels or can detect them while it is being dug. I mean, India has used technology from across the world to try and detect tunnels. In the aftermath of the 2012 discovery of tunnels, India had got some Israeli companies to set up ground sensors. But it was realized that these ground sensors, one at times gave false alarms. Then, they could not detect anything beyond 1 meter to 2 meter of depth. Now, when you have tunnels which are 20 to 25 feet deep, this was totally useless. So this was of no use. And as yet, there is no technology.
Diptiman says that Pakistan does not cut thick vegetation along the border, which provides terrorists trying to cross the border with cover. Monitoring a 200-kilometer long border is also nearly impossible, especially if infiltrators are building advanced tunnels with the help of a defense force.
In fact, in the past 4 years, 6 tunnels have been discovered on the border. And I'm not even counting those that have not been discovered. And I cannot. Because of greater security infrastructure on the border, tunneling has become very, very useful for infiltration. And at this moment, we are sort of in a situation where we struggle more to stop this infiltration than infiltration terrestrially.
You were listening to The Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Arun George, and as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.